Hi friends, joining you from a very special place today. I'm actually in my kitchen and I have some special guests. I figured I would let you check in and see how Olivia and Jimmy are doing. They're still doing great. Jimmy's hanging out in the back. I've been waiting a little while to see if they would come towards the front, but you can see Olivia came to say hello. She's right up front, and I think Jimmy is still eating. I fed them a little while ago, and I think he's been quite content back there since getting fed. So I'm gonna let us read by the fish tank today while we finish up our last part of Socks. And if you remember yesterday, Socks and Charles William got themselves locked in the room, and Mrs. Bricker was kind of panicking and upset that she could not get in. So we're gonna see where the rest of our story takes us. Here we go. The door rattled again. "Charles William, what are you doing?" Mrs. Bricker's voice was frightened. His mother could not get in. Charles William found this development so funny that he laughed even harder. He stuck out his tongue and blew a He found his new noise hilarious. "What am I going to do?" Mrs. Bricker asked herself, and ran down the hall in her bare feet. In a moment, Socks heard her running out the back door, and in another moment, he saw her anxious face above the windowsill. Charles William pulled out his last handful of cotton and threw it to Socks. His mother was outside, and he and the cat were inside. Charles William thought this situation was a huge joke. Socks was tired of chasing cotton. He lay on his side panting while Mrs. Bricker pushed at the window. Charles William did not want the fun to end. He was even willing to sacrifice Brown Bear by throwing him over the crib railing. Socks got to his feet, waggled his rump, and sprang on the bear. "Socks!" shouted Mrs. Bricker through the closed window. "You stop that!" No matter how hard she pounded on the frame, she still could not budge the window, which was too high for her. Socks saw no need to obey. There was nothing she could do to stop his playing with Brown Bear. Charles William threw his blanket out of the crib and looked around for something else to amuse the cat. His sharp eyes saw a tiny bear on the wallpaper beside the door jamb. He grasped a bit of the paper and pulled. "No, no!" shouted his mother, who had papered the room herself to get it ready for her new baby. "Charles William, no!" "Puh," Charles William said again. He did not have to mind his mother. He pulled off a long, satisfying shred of blue printed wallpaper with yellow daisies. All by himself he pulled it off. Nobody helped him. Delighted with his skill and cleverness, he dropped the curl of paper through the bars of the crib to share with Socks. He laughed so hard that he began to hiccup. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Bricker. "Charles William, be a good boy while I run and get a stepladder." Charles William sat, hiccuping, while Socks spared and played with Brown Bear, and then he noticed the light switch beside the door. Still hiccuping, he pulled himself to his feet and worked at the switch until he found the secret of flipping it off and on. The ceiling light went on. Charles William actually turned on the light all by himself. He had flipped the switch by the door, and the light had gone on up there. He had turned on the light just like a grown-up. He turned it off. Miraculous. On, even more miraculous. Off, on, off, on. The fun, the laughter, the hiccups, the magic were suddenly too much for the baby. Charles William went down with a thump and lay back with his thumb in his mouth. Gradually, his hiccups subsided. And there's a picture here, friends, that I wanted to show you, where you can see Mrs. Bricker in the window, and there's Charles William and Socks playing with the bear. Socks, who had been distracted from Brown Bear by the light, lay panting in the midst of the cotton, only half sorry that the fun had ended. He was pleased that Charles William was learning how to play. He looked up at the baby and after a moment of hesitation, leaped lightly to the top of the chest of drawers, and from there into the crib. Charles William smiled drowsily around the thumb in his mouth. This had been the best afternoon of his whole life, the most interesting, the most exciting, the most fun. He had found someone to play with. Socks turned around until he found exactly the spot beside Charles William. He lay down with his back pressed against the back of the baby, whose thumb dropped out of his mouth as he fell asleep. Socks licked a paw, rubbed an ear, and let his washing go at that. For the first time since he had slept on Mrs. Risley's lap, he was completely at peace. The crib was comfortable. The room was quiet. The rustle of Charles William's plastic pants inside the corduroy overalls was friendly and soothing. Socks now had a playing mate and companion. He rested his chin on his outstretched foreleg, but before he could sleep, the step ladder, bumping against the house, made him raise his head. Socks heard Tiffy say, "Mrs. Bricker, why are you climbing the ladder?" "Because Charles William locked me out of the bedroom," answered Mrs. Bricker. "I didn't know he was big enough," said Tiffy. "It's a long story," said Mrs. Bricker. "I'll tell you later." Socks watched Mrs. Bricker raise the window and throw her leg over the sill. She paused when she saw him so close to her baby. Socks gazed at her with a long, clear look that told her plainly, "I have found a friend. This is where I belong." Socks did not take his eyes from Charles William's mother, and she did not take her eyes from him as she climbed into the room and slid the crib away from the door. Then they both noticed Tiffy watching through the window. "Tiffy, go back," ordered Mrs. Bricker in a loud whisper. "You might fall." "Lucky Charles William," said Tiffy before she disappeared from the window. Socks returned his gaze to Mrs. Bricker, who picked up Brown Bear and set him in the crib. With a smile, she reached over to stroke Socks's fur, giving him permission to stay with Charles William. Only then did Socks close his eyes. And that, friends, is the end of the book. I know this is where we usually applaud. We finished a story, so hopefully you're clapping on the other end there with me. I hope you really enjoyed this book, and I love that it ended with Charles William and Socks finding each other as friends. I think that's so important, and friends are such a valuable and important thing to have, so it's really great that they came to understand each other, and they now can play with one another. So again, I really hope that you enjoyed this story. I hope you enjoyed checking in with Olivia and Jimmy and knowing that they're doing just fine. And I'm not quite sure if I'm going to start another chapter book, or I might start some virtual morning meetings that I'm trying to put together and coming up. So I'm going to be in touch with your families. I'll be sending out an email letting you know what comes next as I figure that out with the rest of this week. But I'm so excited that we got through another chapter book together, and I hope you have a great drawing from the last chapter, and I would love to see it if you do. So take care, friends, and I'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.